Look, nobody is in denial, especially those of us living in Delhi can very well understand that climate change is a reality, global warming is a reality, and it is mostly anthropogenic. There is no question about that since 1980s. But the question is, life is only about trade-offs, whether it is personal decision-making or economic decision-making, it's about trade-offs. We have to recognize that if we go too fast into renewable energy, we become overly dependent on single country for the resources. Technological challenge is still there. There is not enough storage in the world for renewable energy, and you need backup from fossil fuel energy in the night when there is no sun and when the wind doesn't blow. And India is a relatively scarce in usable land, which is required for multiple purposes. And there are fiscal implications in terms of tax revenue foregone and freed revenue foregone from fossil fuel transportation or fossil fuel sale. And what about labor displacement, which is currently employed in the traditional energy sector? And what happens to stranded assets impairing bank balance sheets? And given that we are investing a lot in public mobility as well, we need to strike the right balance between e-mobility, which is personal in nature, and public transportation like metro, rail, etc. So these are the multiple considerations we need to factor in when we pursue our energy transition. And first point I mentioned about resources constraint. The red color is very ubiquitous in this slide, and you can see that the dependence on China for cobalt, lithium, graphite, given their processing capabilities, geographical concentration of refined products, and as well as dominating in the downstream and mainstream EV supply chain. This is a reality. And there is an article in The Economist in May which talks about some solar wafer making equipment being exported to India, being delayed, etc. So between modules, cells, and wafers and polysilicon, we have made some headway in solar module manufacturing, somewhat less so in solar cell manufacturing, but wafer, we are in the early stage. But the wafer making equipments have to come from China. So in that sense, we need to understand all these dimensions as we manage our energy transition as well. And look at the amount of revenue we generate from coal-free transport for the railways, and the amount of tax revenues we collect between center and states by selling petrol and diesel. It's about 7.5 lakh crores every year. So the speed with which we abandon ICE engine-driven vehicles will also impact sale of petrol and diesel, and therefore tax revenue. And on top of it, we subsidize renewable energy. Moving on, in terms of land availability, also apart from when we talk of energy transition, we always focus on new supplies, alternative supplies, wind energy, solar energy, nuclear, etc. But the source of energy demand has to be addressed. And surprisingly, in the West, food feed balance is a very important source of energy demand. And therefore, the amount of land that gets freed up in terms of and India actually is a good example in making sure, as we'll see in the next slide, India actually has a much better balance in terms of food versus feed, in devoting the amount of land we need for feeding the population and feeding animals. So the land that is freed up in having a better diet mix will go towards making land available for renewable energy. You see the chart here. India has a very low share of cereals allocated to animal feed. Animal feed consists of mostly human inedible food, but in the developed world, most of the land is being utilized for generating food, which goes to feed either industrial uses or meat production. The important thing here is that if the rest of the world were to follow the same principles as the West, we simply don't have enough land to feed our people, to feed our animal, and to provide for renewable energy, and to provide for industrialization and manufacturing growth. So again, it's a question of finding the right balance. So as I said at the very beginning, policy is no longer about whether we do energy transition. Policy is no longer about whether we grow manufacturing. Policy is no longer about whether we do skilling or employ more women in the workforce. All these things need to be done. But how is the key issue. That is why, as I said, the mantra for reforms is all about grunt work.